One of the most important things I think to understand kind of where we are now is the history of analytics and then kind of springboarding into today's landscape for digital analytics. And the reason that that's important is because analytics is so new. Really, if you go back and your textbooks talk about this too, that this really didn't come about until the mid 1990s. And so when we talk about the mid 1990s, just so you know and how old I am, I was just starting college, and so I'm not that old, meaning this is brand new. And so when we talk about the history, there's really not a ton of history there, but a lot of improvements and drastic leaps have been made over those very short few decades. And so as we look at the history of analytics, I want you to kind of keep that in mind, that as you enter an organization, some of the people who started out in the baby analytics phase are still stuck in the baby analytics phase, or what we refer to as web analytics 1.0. And so part of your job is going to be educating them on, hey, listen, I know this is how it used to be, but this has happened, and here's what's coming now, and this is what's going on now. And so to do that, you really have to effectively understand where we've come from. This is not a history class. I'm not going to dig deep. I'm just going to give you enough information that you understand kind of the differences and the changes, and then kind of show you the contrast of today's landscape and set you loose from there. So when we talk about the beginning, there was the URL. And so URLs, we all know what those are. You type them into the search engine and up comes a website. Think of it like the street address of a different website. And so there was URLs. Well, then people figured out that there was, you can get into these server logs and you could find out from your website, what file names people were using to find you, and what time they were coming, or what file names they were accessing, what time they were coming to your website, and what IP address they were using to get there, and what about a browser ID? So was this Google? And what was a referring site, and how did they get there? And so we start pulling together of this information, and this was like, to give you the contrast of today, it was basically like a kid drawing a map on the back of a napkin, and that was really what the information was coming out. It was very, very rustic and very hard to understand for somebody who didn't really know code. And so people were playing around with these server logs and these buckets of information and coming out with this really interesting information, but the general public, and remember, websites in of themselves were just kind of really coming onto the forefront here. And so you have this, like, oh my gosh, what's a website? And now, wait a minute, you can collect all this information. And that was way, 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 way in the back of people's minds. Well, then we move into 1995, and Dr. Turner creates this log file analysis program. And what that did was it took this back of the napkin kind of thing and really put it together in a meaningful way so that end users, again, still IT nerds, but less nerdy, could really understand what this was and understand how to use this in a meaningful way. So now we had a repository and an easily accessible database, if you will, program to kind of house all this information. Then we have this thing, and we still see it on some older web pages, these counters, and they literally looked like odometers on web pages. And so counters come onto the scene through a company called Web Counter, and it would count how many times people hit your website. Well, the problem with this, and you'll see this when we talk about definitions, is that it didn't really differentiate between whether I was going on the website 17 times or 17 people were going on the website one time. And so web counters don't exactly work, but it gave us a really interesting view of what was going on the website. Then we got into commercial web analytics through a company called Web Trends. This is when commercial web analytics really, really took off, and the businesses started to use them, and they started to compare themselves to some other interesting information, and to some competitors, in fact. But this was all very clunky still. You had to add, when the commercial web analytics came on the scene, you had to add this really, we'll call it heavy code. And for those of you who don't know, code is like the encryption. So what we see on the screen, even right now, what you're seeing on the screen, behind that are a lot of different elements. And it used to be binary code, right? Ones and zeros, but there's different scripts and different information that the website sends to your browser so that you can see it in a pretty way. Well, JavaScript, and that's how it was. It was lots and lots and lots of code in order for this analytics thing to happen. Well, JavaScript tags really narrowed that down. So instead of having these lines and lines and lines and lines of code, JavaScript said, hey, listen, we can really bring this all together, and we can put out maybe 5 lines of code, and bam, there it is, and it's still going to do the same thing. And if you look at your textbook, they'll show you the synthesis and how synthesized Java is, and the JavaScript for Google is even shorter than that. We'll talk about that later in the term. Then what was really cool, it still is kind of cool, and we'll talk about this as we move forward, but there's this thing called site overlay, and your book shows you a picture of this. And so what you could do is on your site, it would show you, this density of what percentage of people were clicking on the top, it says home and then about, and so it would overlay with these percentages and how many people were going there. And then even cooler, somebody else comes out with this click density index, and so you can see by the deeper red, or the deepness of the red, where people were clicking. And so there's different visual ways of seeing the data, and that's key, because in analytics, and actually in all types of data, and this is where communication and graphic design really shine in terms of the intersection of data and information sharing. But the prettier the data, I hate to say it like that, but the prettier the data, the easier it's consumed by executives who have limited time to look at things and limited attention spans. So the site overlay and click density really made sense for the audiences that they were being handed to. The other piece of this is they were able to start segmenting the data. So, okay, it really gave us a first look at, 35% of people are clicking on the about. Well, who are these 35%? Why didn't they click somewhere else? And we were able to take this bigger piece of the pie, right? 50,000 hits to our website in a day, and segment this out. Well, 25,000 came from here, 25,000 came from here. But not only that, but we're able to dig even deeper and deeper and deeper till we really got this meaningful data and this meaningful look at a group of people that we otherwise wouldn't have had. And so the site overlay and click density really began that process. So it was kind of like of all the people who clicked over here, what are those people like? And how are they different than the people who clicked over here? And so we're beginning to have this comparative data as well. Then in 2005, Google Analytics came onto the scene. And really, if you look at the web history from 1.0 to 2.0, this was the determining factor. This was the turning point. So Google purchases Urchin. Urchin was a kind of a corporate analytics vendor. And Google then, a year later, turns around and releases the free tool, which we now know as Google Analytics. And that was a game changer, because now we have this free Corvette that the public has access to, and people went nuts. And so now every business has access to it. Nobody knows how to use it, but by gosh, we're all going to try. And so we began to really explore analytics at a much deeper way. But really, Google Analytics' biggest impact was to create this massive data democracy. So now everybody can add this quick, and I talked about the JavaScript, right? This quick piece of JavaScript code to the footer of their website, and boom, now you have this easy to use reporting tool. And now looking back at that, in 2006, that reporting tool is total crap. Excuse my language, but it was. It was so basic, and it was so based on clickstream analysis, but it gave us data, and people love data because then you can talk about data, and it gives you, it gives you information. It gives you a different insight that you haven't had before. And so the number of people who were focused on web analytics went from like a few nerds to thousands to hundreds of thousands, and it's still growing. It's crazy how many people talk about Google Analytics. And in fact, now, just like us, we're sitting at a university learning about it so that you can be certified, so that you can go out and work for businesses. The good news is this is so new, 2006, that we're really just at the tipping point of businesses really implementing this kind of corporation-wide. And so you guys are really getting in on the front end of this. So in other news, Yahoo, which for many of you, this is long forgotten, but Yahoo used to be a big player in the field, and it still is to some degree, as is Bing. So Yahoo acquires Index Tools in 2008 and says, hey, we can do this too. And so they come onto the scene with Yahoo Tools and Yahoo Web Tools. Today, there are so many tools and micro tools and tools that work with other tools, and there's lots and lots and lots. But at the end of the day, Google Analytics, in my opinion, is still king. And we're going to talk about why we use Google moving forward. But Adobe just came out with their software, and it's pretty cool. The difference is it's not free. And so we'll talk about the different tools and what's good and bad and whatnot in a few classes. And so again, I just bring this 1.0 to 2.0. I don't know which order you're watching these videos in, but you'll see this in one of the other videos talking about what digital analytics is. But we see this shift from this 1.0 of really basic linear data into this much more multifaceted, complex, qualitative and quantitative juxtaposition of lots of different continuous information, making meaningful decisions to assist our customers in finding what they want. We really move into this whole relationship building phase because we have this information and are able to analyze it.